I'd like to introduce Dr. Susan Barker-Colo, who's a special type of psychologist called a neuropsychologist. So I suppose the first question is, what is a neuropsychologist?
A neuropsychologist is someone who is interested in changes in thinking that occur after things like a stroke or a brain injury or as a result of conditions like multiple sclerosis. When I say changes in thinking, I'm talking about things like depression and anxiety, but I'm also talking about things like problems with memory, problems with language, problems with paying attention that happen as a result of having had a stroke.
These are quite common after a stroke. How would I, if I felt a neuropsychologist would help me, how do I get hold of one?
Well, a lot of rehab teams actually have a neuropsychologist as one of their team members, mostly in the hospital settings, but also in some of the private settings. If you're not involved in a setting that has a neuropsychologist, you can always get a referral to see one, either privately or as part of a hospital. Now, referrals can come from any health professional, but most people tend to get one from a physician.
If my family member or spouse has had a stroke, what type of changes would I see in them?
Oh, the changes can be very variable, and they're different for each person who's had a stroke. You might, again, notice changes in mood, such as, flattening, or depression or sadness. You might notice increased anxiety or not wanting to try new things because they might be worried, for example, about falling or having another stroke. You might also notice things like unusual behaviors, very common after strokes and head injuries. Things like laughing inappropriately, crying inappropriately. It's not necessarily that they're feeling sad or that they're feeling that something is funny. It may just be a result of the actual damage caused by the stroke.
So what can I do to help them?
The easiest thing to do is to try and get a referral to a psychologist or to a neuropsychologist to help you to work through what is the specific thing that's causing my spouse to have the problem, and then finding specific strategies to address that, because again, with each person it will be very different.
You mentioned inappropriate behaviours or behaviours that could be embarrassing. What are these types of behaviours and how should I react to them?
It's not uncommon for somebody who's had a stroke to do things like swear inappropriately, laugh inappropriately, have inappropriate sexual behaviors in social situations. Not uncommon. It is usually a result of the damage that's occurred to the brain. So it's really important for the family member and for the people who are around the person on a daily basis to understand that it's not something that's being done intentionally. They're not doing it to make you angry or because they're angry with you, but to understand that it is a result of the damage that's occurred. One of the common strategies for actually dealing with that is first, tell yourself, they're not doing this on purpose. It's not being done to harm anybody. And then, if it's a really negative behavior, try and remove the person from the situation so that they can calm down. Very often these behaviors occur because somebody's got either a higher anxiety level or an excitement level, or they want to interact, and it's just that what comes out isn't what they planned. So perhaps taking the person out of the situation and allowing that anxiety to go back down, or just ignoring the behavior. If it's one that you're able to ignore and you're in a situation where you can ignore it, try ignoring the behavior and not reinforcing it in any way.
If it's quite common, should I tell visitors or family and friends to expect it?
Absolutely, absolutely. It makes it so much easier for people to interact with somebody with a stroke or with a brain injury if they know what to expect. You can imagine interacting with somebody and if all of a sudden they blurt out a swear word, if you weren't prepared for that, you can imagine how somebody might react. So it's really important to prepare people who interact with somebody. These are some of the things that Joe tends to do, especially if he gets agitated or if he gets angry or anxious. And just have that as something that you do with everybody new who interacts with your loved one.
And therefore it would affect memory. Can you discuss some strategies for dealing with memory loss?
Memory is one of the most common complaints after stroke in terms of changes in thinking. Now, there's a number of different parts to memory, and each one of those parts can get damaged as a result of stroke. So the different strategies that you might use would be different depending on which part of your memory has been affected. And that's the role of the neuropsychologist, to figure out what's been damaged and provide specific strategies for each. So for example, somebody might have memory problems because they have difficulty paying attention to things. So if you're having difficulty paying attention, then it's important that you get people to slow down, that If you're not taking all the information from a conversation in, you might ask people to write things down for you. You might keep a diary for yourself. Using a diary is probably one of the most common rehabilitative techniques for memory problems, whether it's problems with creating memories or problems retrieving them later or finding them later. So getting a day, either electronic or paper day timer or day planner is probably one of the easiest things that people can do. And it's not just for writing down things that you have to do, it's also for writing down things that you've done. So if somebody has problems remembering what they did yesterday, they can always open their day planner and say, look, oh yes, my wife did visit yesterday at 2 o'clock.
Right.
So they can use that aid to replace their memory that's not functioning properly.
Talked about people getting depressed. If I feel that I'm getting more and more depressed and that I feel like I really don't want to be here anymore, maybe contemplating suicide, what advice would you give?
Absolutely, to find your GP or find some professional help, find somebody to talk to. It's not uncommon to have thoughts about harming yourself after having had a stroke. Again, it's a huge loss to be grieved, but it's very important to find somebody to talk to. And that's what your health professionals are there for.
I've heard after a stroke that being tired or having fatigue is quite common. What is fatigue and what can I do about it?
Absolutely true. Fatigue is probably one of the most common problems that people complain about after having had a stroke. A lot of people who have fatigue don't notice it as fatigue. Instead, they might notice that they're more irritable, that they become angry more quickly, they have a lower frustration tolerance. They also might notice things like that they have difficulty in really complex situations. So if you're trying to listen to 2 or 3 people talk at the same time, it's much more difficult. What was it?
So what can I do for fatigue? Have you got any suggestions?
Yes, a few simple things that you can do to help yourself with fatigue are, first off, notice what your own signs of fatigue are. Do you tend to get more irritable? Do you just feel that you've got no energy? Do you find that you're doing things and it's a lot more difficult? So noticing your own signs that you're getting fatigued and then stopping and taking a rest when you can. The other thing that you can do is figure out which parts of the day do you have the most energy in. A lot of people have more energy in the morning, so it would be important then to do all of your tasks in the morning and then save your energy in the afternoon. Another strategy that people can use is to spread their energy or spread their tasks across days. So if you're feeling really energetic on a particular day, don't kind of go gung-ho, because if you do that, you're going to use up all of your energy and you're going to spend the next 3 days recovering from it. Right. So it's really important to kind of spread your energy across time.
After a stroke, understandably, people get very depressed and anxious about it and they start to grieve. Can you explain how a neuropsychologist can help with that recovery?
Yeah, probably about 1 in 3 people who've had a stroke will experience either problems with depression or anxiety. Very common and very normal to have those sorts of reactions. Well, you've got to remember that somebody who's had a stroke has had a life-threatening illness happen to them, and not only are they dealing with the fact that they've had something life-threatening happen, but they're also having to deal with the changes in themselves that have resulted. Grieving for losses, so grieving for the loss of mobility perhaps, or grieving for the loss of independence. Those are some of the issues that they have to face. There's also the anxiety of, what did I do wrong? Is it going to happen again? How are my family going to react? Am I going to be able to go back to work? So there's all of these questions that come up for somebody who's had a stroke, and it's really important for somebody to have the opportunity to talk about those issues and to talk through them. And it's really hard to do that with family members. So it's quite good to have a professional who you can speak to, whether it's a counselor, a psychologist, and just bring those issues to the table and help them understand what you're going through, and then they can then help you work through those issues.
Thank you very much.